So I am here with Dr. Fairclough and Professor Ritchie. Please give them a round of loud chat room chatter claps for the great presentations that they just had. So what I want to do is I'm going to start with a question, first for Dr. Fairclough and then for Professor Ritchie. So Dr. Fairclough, when I was hearing your presentation, you made me think about Dante and the Divine Comedy. Because what Dante does with the Divine Comedy, if you remember, he writes 2 letters, right? One called The Banquet and one called The Letter, where he's specifically saying, particularly to his Christian readers, what I'm about to do with this poem is not something you've ever read before. Mm-hmm. So you're repositioning, right, Graffiti Bridge as a different type of aesthetic. Yeah. My question to you is, who's responsible for articulating to the masses that it's a aesthetic? Is it the artist's responsibility? Is it the industry's responsibility? Or is it the critic's responsibility to say this is something different than what you're used to getting?
Yeah, well, I think it's the responsibility of cultural critics to reframe it. I don't think it's because Prince, I think, created that film obviously as a movie, but as it clearly, I think for many people, does not hold up as a classically constructed narrative, as in, the kind of the way that you have a particular structure, it's there, but it's flawed, isn't it? We all know that. So I think it's a responsibility of cultural critics and scholars to reframe it, to find different ways, different avenues, different ways into understanding it that give it much more of a richer understanding. I mean, I've always loved it anyway, but if I think of it as this is like a set of music videos, and that's the way I can kind of justify it and think that actually this works because it is, a set of music videos, not necessarily a fully constructed classical narrative.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you. Professor Ritchie, I love the connection that you made between beginning with Dirty Mind and then referencing that with the Thieves in the Temple. And so my question is, could you speak a little bit to clothing, particularly with Prince, but then even in general, if you want, clothing as a self-referential theme for Prince to construct his own mythology?
Could you repeat that? Sorry, my boyfriend's just coughed.
Yeah, no problem. Could you talk a little bit about Prince using clothing as a self-referential theme to construct his own mythology?
Okay. Yeah, I think starting with Dirty Mind, I mean, we spoke about it on Friday and Saturday. Dirty Mind was the beginning of Prince creating Prince. And it was when Kirsty was speaking about bricolage and she was talking about Prince taking, like all these kind of signifiers from different subcultures, the Dirty Mind outfit, there's the trench coat, there's the bandana, which has kind of like historical connotations with queer culture, there's the rude boy pin, there's the kind of fetishism of the kind of defaced trench coat, the bikini briefs, that type of thing. Prince was creating, and again, it's something we spoke about before, but was creating these kind of worlds that he was living in. And this image was something that he kind of was creating from early on. And I think like by the time you get to Graffiti Bridge, he had, he travelled to Purple Rain. He became the finesse kind of new romantic dandy that was actually kind of out of date by the time Purple Rain came along in fashion terms, if that makes sense. But by the time 1990 came along, he had to redefine who he was. And I think I didn't really speak about it because when I was doing the presentation, I kind of realised just how kind of gritty the costumes are in Graffiti Bridge and how much you can go into them. I think that was when he was kind of defining Prince at his kind of true self. Mm-hmm. And I think when we think of Bodywear and when we think of when Prince first signed, Prince was wearing, like Dan-skins and leotards and waist chains and chains around his hips and his, all these really unusual kind of unconventional dressings for a man, for a black man, and I think Graffiti Bridge was a way of him kind of redefining himself, but also going back to that kind of true self. And it was part of him kind of creating this silhouette, particularly in 1991 and forward, that kind of created the Prince look, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And he does it all throughout, like different phases of Prince, like like with New Power Generation, he was creating like kind of street style that he was selling with Joe Bloggs, which is a Manchester, if anybody from the UK knows, it's this really kind of unflattering, like comfy, like spandex and cotton, where like that's not Prince, but Prince wanted to kind of create this hyperized version of him. And again, that's what Kirsty was talking about in our talk. I think I've just blethered a lot, but I hope you get what I mean.
No, I think you're right on. Dr. Fairclough, when I was listening to your talk, I was thinking about those kind of those avant-garde plays where you have raised stages and one stage represents one thing and one thing. And even if you go back like to the ancient Greek play where you had Hades and Earth. So my question is, could you talk a little bit about the moments in the play? Because you talk about Graffiti Bridge creating this kind of surreal detached from physical motion. And so could you talk about a couple of intersections where you see that moment where there's a transition being made from the physical to the metaphysical, where we're being told this is the physical thing, but this is the metaphysical thing that's being represented also. Could you talk about some of those places in the movie where you see that?
I think there are so many of them. There are moments on the actual bridge and where that happens, I think, and where that it's also really jarring, I think, some of those moments where it just none of it quite gels. But if you look at it as a piece of kind of a postmodern kind of again going back to the notion of bricolage and a kind of collision of different styles and ideas, both physical and metaphysical, I think that can then be understood ish, I think. But I think there are lots of moments, but there are the whole movie's full of them.
Yeah. Thanks. Professor Ritchie, could you talk a little bit about, because you talked about, of course, Prince combining like traditional masculine and feminine types of clothing, and that then so can you talk about him doing that in those designs where he's becoming not just a collage of human history, but then in becoming a collage of human history, becoming beyond human, right? Making himself a metaphysical being in his fashion and clothing.
Okay, that's quite a question. I think with Prince, I think it was something he did throughout his career. I think this kind of blend of masculine and feminine. I think at the beginning Prince was doing it with intent, and he was doing it to shock and sell records and to like to get his name out there, because we know that he was interested in like the Beatles and their haircuts and things like that. We know that, the sensationalism. But I think the closer that like in the 1990s and in Graffiti Bridge and forward, I think Prince's presentation through clothing is very natural to him. When you talk about like male and female, in Graffiti Bridge, some of the stuff that he wears, well, actually, the majority of the stuff that he wears, I would say, is all unisex. It's neither male nor female. It's, like you say, it's kind of a creation of its own. It's a kind of hyper version of kind of self, if that makes sense. I don't think that Prince, especially at that point, I don't think Prince was trying to, and I don't think Prince was androgynous as well. The more I think about it, when I first kind of started really looking at Prince's clothing a couple of years ago, like in a kind of academic sense, I always was like, Prince is androgynous. Prince is, like he's very. But I don't think he is. I think he's, again, I don't have an answer as such, but it's something that I'm going through. He was just very much his own body and his own self. Mm-hmm. And what Prince wears, particularly in Graffiti Bridge, would look completely different on another person. Right. Even if it's somebody like Bowie, who was androgynous, like he's a tough cookie when it comes to clothing. That's why it's so important that we need to actually really look at Prince's clothing, and we need to. There's such a wealth of material, and there's so many brilliant creatives that worked alongside Prince to create this vision, but that Prince created these looks. Prince knew exactly what he wanted to look like, and he did rip off designers and things like that, and like he like he said, he took a little bit of this and a little bit of that and made it his own. But it's really important that we start to look at Prince's fashion critically, and I'm looking forward to more people like kind of researching Prince's fashion.
Cassie, can I just say, you need to write that book. That will make a fantastic book. It really, seriously. And that
it's literally my dream.
That fragmentation of self, but also that kind of stability of self and how that's manifested through fashion. Yeah, you should write that.
Even like when Prince passed away, and you think of what Judith Hill was talking about, like the clothing that he was wearing, and that he didn't wear, like, we know he didn't wear jeans. Well, he wore jeans at the beginning, but he didn't like pockets and things like that. There's this like tactility as well that runs through Prince's clothing, and like I can't imagine Prince being comfortable in Purple Rain gear. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. I can't imagine him being comfortable in the brocades that were encrusted with rhinestones and gems and all this stuff. I see Prince comfortable in Graffiti Bridge. Mm-hmm. He's obviously, like going through stuff with his spirituality and, like with the business and the money issues and stuff. But I see him, I see Prince very, very of himself in that film.
Yeah.
So we have about 3 minutes left, and usually problems with conference presentations that we don't get to say everything in our paper because of time. So would you guys give you guys each a minute and a half just to kind of hit on some point that you want to make sure people leave with your presentation, or something that you had to leave out that you really want to go? We'll go with Dr. Fairclough first, and then Professor Ritchie, and we'll close it out.
Wow, I think you're the best moderator ever. You're also making us work. I like it. I would say really that... well, just what my main point really was that, let's reappraise it. Let's look at it as in a music video context, and also through postmodernism as a lens through which to understand the film more effectively. Let's just say that.
Amen. All right, Professor Ritchie.
I think because D'Angela asked me to write about the Graffiti Bridge costumes, so it's not something I'm writing a piece on Bodywear, so it's something that I have looked at, but I've never given it as much thought as I have done when I'm doing this project. And I think for me to remember as well, not to forget Graffiti Bridge, because it's such a wealth of visual content, but also like Erica's presentation yesterday, and it was just so brilliant to I think his self is so present in this film, if that makes sense, and it exudes in everything that he presents in the film. So yeah, it's been fantastic to kind of celebrate it. And I didn't get to say it because I blether a lot, so I had to cut it from my presentation. But I just want to thank D'Angela and Arthur and everyone that put together this event. It's been incredible, and I'm really missing not being in Minneapolis, and it's made this. I mean, I'm in Scotland, and I'm a bit of an insular Prince fan. I don't have friends that like Prince, so being in this kind of set in this purple community, it's always such a fabulous, like, energizing experience. So I just want to say a huge thanks and watch Graffiti Bridge again.
Yay.
We're unified.
Yay.
I would like to say thank you, Cassie. It's you did a fantastic job, and Kirsty for always being here. So I really do appreciate.
Thank you, Dan.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Celie.
Thank you. Hey, Doc. Professor Law. Okay, so we are already live. First of all, I want everybody in the chat room to clap up, big up, give them for their great presentations. And I want to get right into it. So we're going to go in the order that you guys presented. Dr. Turman.
I've got my pen and paper ready for you, so I'm ready to go.
When I was listening to your presentation, I kept thinking about Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man.
Yeah.
And so, can you talk a little bit about the fashion in Graffiti Bridge, but then just a larger notion of the Zoot suit as an example of the need to be seen socially and politically? And we'll start there, and then we'll come back because I have a second follow-up question for you.
Absolutely. And, I put the African-American community forward in Harlem through Lindy Hop first, but I think that was the practical part of it, right? But it was so important for people to be seen, and especially this post Great Depression era political space, and being able to finally afford some clothing, and even doing the hand-me-down improvisational work where they would cinch up their pants, etc., kind of home make them, and being visible, right? They're taking up space. Lindy Hop is huge. They took up a ton of space on the dance floor to do those moves. Obviously, a regular dance night, they wouldn't be doing that type of movement for every song. But taking that outside in space, showing this sort of colorful, outlandish, even just the clothing took up a lot of space, right there, and taking up the fabric. That amount of fabric was political at the time, and they embraced that. And I think that was really important in the Mexican American community as well. You have the Japanese community on the West Coast that was wearing them as well, Filipino women. It was this desire to be seen. And I think that was so important at that time.
Yeah. That's great when you say taking up space with color, because you made me think about the scene in Django where he's a free man and he's wearing all the colors, but the slave, and that's what you chose, even though you're free, right? That's like one of my favorite lines. So thanks for that answer. Okay, so I'm going to be unfair because I'm going to ask you to do two things with your article, which is project forward and come back. Right?
Okay.
So with all of the clubs being owned by African Americans, my question to you is, if all of the clubs are owned by African Americans, and we have Prince's statement in Baltimore where he says, next time I come to Baltimore, I want to play in a stadium owned by you, and I want to live in a hotel, stay in a hotel owned by you. Do you see then the ownership of those clubs by African Americans as the turning point of Prince moving from an assimilationist, integrationist notion to, if not Black nationalism, a notion of self-determinism?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I mean, I think you're kind of like honing in on a point that I was trying to make in that talk, and I that's partly why I think that this is a turning point. Not that Prince had not been thinking, of course, and working toward Black self-ownership, right, and determinism. But yeah, for sure, we see Paisley Park, and we see I made a note in that article of like going back to even think about DIY recording in that way too, right? Like, it's a way of sort of determining your own path. But yeah, I absolutely do think that's a really interesting connection that you just made. Yeah.
So cool. All right, because I'm gonna have a second half of that.
Yeah.
After Dr. Turman. Dr. Turman, I love the line when you said that, right? The dandy lives and sleeps in front of the mirror, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I know that in my work, I've talked a lot about the dandy. So my question is, looking at the fashion in the world that the dandy creates and looking at Graffiti Bridge, could you talk a little bit about how the artist is innately the dandy because the artist has to create the world that allows him to be creative?
Wow, that's a very meta question. Thank you.
Yeah.
And first of all, that quote that you mentioned, I just want to, I needed to fact check myself more, and a little correction. The statement was actually published by Charles Baudelaire in 1887 posthumously. And I know I started out by saying 1897. I'm terrible with dates. So anyway, yeah. So the dandy, Baudelairian dandyism, he talks about this, how it's all one. And when I talk about Prince as a dandy, I really think about him in terms of his work, his lifestyle, his art, his music, and his physical appearance. Everything is cohesive and everything is intentional, and it all buys into this specific idea of dandyism, and also, like we said before, taking up space and pushing these social boundaries. And that's where I find, especially Monica Miller's work with Black dandyism, really comes in to put that in that Black history perspective and show just how important that was for people of color and women and the queer population, especially in the 20th century. So, and then there's dandyism today still. I mean, she cites all sorts of other artists that are doing this, like in the last bit of my presentation, where we saw last week all of the designers coming out and walking and being sure that they're really showing up and wearing this clothing out in public and creating that space. And so I think this conception of putting public space and creating that as an art world in itself is important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know if I answered your question.
Did you hit it right on the head and get to Professor Law? So Professor Law, kind of, connecting to the whole ownership, thinking about the first people that Prince signs, right? Mavis Stable, George Clinton, right?
Mm-hmm.
And talk about it being a legacy film. So can you connect that notion to his father working 35 years and having nothing to show for it, and Prince not wanting the same for his masters, and how that having those legacy people in that film, right, is eventually going to explode into that concept of, and this is why ownership is important?
Yeah, I mean, I think, wow, that's a deep question. You asked such a good question. They're hard. They're hard questions.
Very intense.
I think undoubtedly Paisley Park was a way for him to protect a legacy and project that legacy forward, to carry it forward, right? One of the things that, I don't know if this is going to answer your question, but I was thinking about this last night, and I saw someone mention in the chat about John L. Nelson Project's album. That was a recording of his music that was put out, I think, like 2 years ago, and it's a beautiful album. And I wondered, how come Prince never recorded his own father and put out an album, even if it was just on but that's where you get like all these lawyers get involved and they just screw everything up. So like he couldn't probably contractually even do that with someone like John L. Nelson without having to sort of commit to it in a more sort of professional, fully formed fashion like he was trying to do with Mavis Staples and George Clinton. So yeah, I mean, I absolutely think that their role as ancestors was also they were innovators, right? So I think he was trying to carry innovation forward. And as I mentioned in the talk, I think he was still trying to do that within a capitalist system, which was going to be a problem. But at that stage that I'm talking about here in like 89, 90, 91, he still was, thinking that he could work within that system. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I that's right on. That's right on the point. So, Dr. Turman, and this is a pretty unfair question, but I want to, your question made a lot of people think about respectability politics, and I push back on people who are negative about respectability politics because I don't think they understand it enough to be really negative about it. But my point to you is, could you talk a little bit about how the Zoot suit was not just about respectability politics projecting outwardly, but also a manifestation of people's own interpersonal respect for themselves and the ability for them to stylize and celebrate themselves as a notion of respecting themselves in their culture.
Right. So you have, yet again, I'll reference Monica Miller's work where she looks at W.E.B. Du Bois and addresses that same question. And it goes back to, I've been steeped in looking at the European theories of dandyism outside of this work, and how the dandy is really defined over in France and England as more of a subtle. It's very subtle, the ways that the dandy alters their appearance and changes the cut of the suit, and it's all about the subtle details, right? And you have those subtle details in Prince and in the Times clothing for sure, but then I think that where Black dandyism differs from that is very important in showing that it doesn't need to be subtle. It can be excessive. It can be to be interpreted and for interpreting other social critiques. And as you saw in the first slide, or I guess it was the second slide with Janelle Monáe and the way that she interprets dandyism, is very out there, and the Congolese sapeurs, and I showed a photo of the Congolese sapeurs, who are women doing this in Brazzaville, but also you have, it started with the men out there, and that's a 20th century adaptation of dandyism, because I think it's broader than this definition that is in line with the respectability politics, right? Like it's broader than that. And so Monica Miller goes on sort of two different paths where she really talks about how it's not just about this Du Boisian
right
take on it, right? And it's getting out there, and that's more the Zoot suit, I would say. I mean, the colors and the plaids and the huge length of the coat and all the accessories, that's much more flamboyant, I would say, than the typical 19th century European dandy. And I would say a lot of scholars of dandyism in the strict sense in France would probably err on that side that, oh, that's not actually dandyism, but it's adjacent to it. But I would say it's straight up dandyism. I mean, they're out there, they're radical, and they're using clothing in this radical way, and they're taking this colonialist look, and they are just shoving it back in your face in this very amazing way that you can't ignore. So
cool. So we have 2 minutes, and so I wanted to get back to the question to speak for Professor Loss about the after show as a part of it, but we don't have enough time. So what I want to do though is, because I like to cap things off, so I want to give each one of you guys about a minute, 45 seconds to a minute, because with these conferences we don't get to put everything in our paper in our talk. So I just want you to go and I'll
Nope.
You froze. What did you say?
It's okay. So he basically wants there you
Just go ahead. Go ahead, Karen. Anything from your talk you want to share that you didn't get to put in? Yeah.
Great. So first of all, before I forget, I want to thank D'Angela yet again for putting this on. This is always the highlight of my year. I love it so much, and it is amazing. And I also thank Cam for all those photos. He really helped me out with the research for this. And again, apologies for the sound on that video. I didn't realize how high the sound was up when I recorded it. So we cannot discuss what I said. I was just basically talking about, I guess I could talk about this since most people missed what I was saying. So that was a clip about Whitey's Lindy Hoppers. It's one of the soundies. And interestingly enough, I've never seen that clip in mainstream culture, just through my Lindy Hop portals. And the New York Times published something about soundies last week, and they started off with that clip. So I was pretty excited to see that. And basically, it was with Norma Miller. She was the youngest member of Whitey's Lindy Hoppers, and recently passed away a year ago. And is really an amazing legend for the dance community. And she really, I think one of the best things she did was she stayed in show business that whole entire time from the 30s and on. And she would always put Black history first and foremost when we were talking about swing dancing. And I think that is a huge thing that she gave us, as well as Frankie Manning is at the end of the clip dancing with Ann Johnson. And he's the one that has the really perfect Zoot suit outfit, right? He's got the hat, he's got the huge long draped coat. He's got those pants that really show, they were kind of short, right. Really showing like they're functional, right? He's dancing in them. And he was really called the ambassador of swing. He passed away in 2009, and he did a lot of work to innovate the dance. And I think this is another example of I wanted to put the dancing first and foremost, or not first and foremost, but I wanted to make sure to highlight the dancing in this, because that's something that I think has been missing from a lot of discussion about Prince and what has led up to Prince and his image and these other groups that he's also created, like the Time, and their dancing as well. And you have the Game Boys that are emerging around this time with him to really make him step up his own game, Prince. And dancing is really, really important in terms of creating agency, right? And then I also was not able to mention queer culture and dandyism, and that's very, very important thing as well. And then one thing that I did cut out was I was going to try and tackle the misogyny with Morris Day and the time, and that is a part of 19th century French dandyism for sure. Baudelaire, he has some statements in there where he talks about the vulgarity of women because they're naturally beautiful and not artificially anyway.
Right.
It's complicated. Right. So that's
Dr. Rock, I know we're short on time, so just give us just something that you want them to take or something you may have not been able to get in.
The only thing I had to cut off right before I started to talk about, if this seems like if what I was saying seems like a lot to put on Graffiti Bridge, remember what happens next, right? That what you were alluding to it in your first question to me, I think, that this is the moment when Prince begins to really start to fight with Warner Brothers. And what struck me was I was reading an interview with Randy Phillips, who was Prince's co-manager only from 1990 to 91. And he said that, that it was during the box office failure of Graffiti Bridge, which would have been November 90. That's when he really started to get angry with Warner's and start to demand that they give back his masters. And that, of course they wouldn't do that, et cetera. He was angry about the promotion, the distribution. And so it's very interesting to me because I think in the pop culture, we think of that move happening a few years later, right? Maybe as late as like 93. But I think it's happening in 1990. His contract was coming up. It was for renewal. That's partly why Phillips was hired. So I think, where this is situated, Graffiti Bridge is situated in his career is a really fascinating element of the same story that I was telling, and then what happens, after that too. So
thank y'all so much.
Thank you, Celie.
Thank you.
And now I'm going to turn it back over to our fearless leader, Professor Duff. Thank you.
Thank you.